Hey all, we are finally reaching the tower itself in Professor Layton and the Curious Village, and provided my voice can hold up through this part, because I have been a little bit scratchy over the last week or so, we will be reaching the conclusion of the game as a whole. But to start with, when you get here, you do have to have completed at least 75 puzzles to be able to progress into the end game. And that might sound like a lot just hearing the number, but honestly, if you've been playing this either the way I have, or if you've just been tapping away at anything that looks interesting in the village, like on the way here, then you'll have probably done that. I can see why it might be contentious to some people that the story stuff is locked off behind what look like optional puzzles. But honestly, it's not enough for it to be annoying to me. Like, if it was a case of you need 100% of the puzzles out of the way before you can complete it, I could see it being an issue. But if you're at least somewhat curious about the Curious Village, you'll have found 75 puzzles. You'll be fine when you get here. But basically everyone in the village up to this point has warned us about the tower. And maybe that's justified by the fact that we just step in through the front door and we just fall and potentially do a lot of damage to ourselves, because this old structure, it doesn't look too sturdy. But more importantly, this is the part of the game where it will, over the course of the final chapter, it will be spelling out all the different mysteries that we've had up to this point. There will be some points where I'll just sort of shut up and let the game speak for itself, because I don't want to be explaining the bloody obvious that's on screen. But there are also some parts where it still leaves you open to speculate right now, including what we just saw. There seems to be a key assigned to every villager, just on the wall there, except for Simon's one that wasn't. And all that's making me think of is if that's the key of time that unlocks their death. I really need to rewatch Shred vs. Blue at some point. I rewatched the first series a little while ago, but you know, I loved that series as a kid. This diary here, it seems to be written from the same voice, or a similar voice to the other diary entries that we've seen up to this point. And again, it seems to be vaguely referring to some kind of project that's been going on. But I recognise this guy. I think we've seen him before. I love the angry pointing animation that Bruno has, I've got to say. And I can tell a mile off when we get this beard and moustache for the sake of animation, because I know that is one of the animator shortcuts that you tend to see a lot, but it actually looks legitimately cool just seeing his facial hair flapping around like that. Like, I don't even see it as a shortcut, I see it as a cool look. So here we have the classic setup of the endgame dungeon is the tower, and we've got to work our way up, and that's what we'll be doing over the course of this chapter. And it is a very classic setup to use, but it also works very well here, because the tower, it's the centerpiece of the whole village. All the villagers are terrified of it, they all feel uncomfortable around it, it makes these weird noises, it basically overlooks everything, so it's pretty obvious that we're going to be making our way to the top at some point in the game. But here, it's time for the big reveal. What is St. Mystere's big secret? manage the life of the villagers. I love this. I love the fact that Layton is always a couple of steps ahead, especially when it's something big like this. And there we go. All the villagers are robots that were created by Bruno here. Now, as for how I feel about the twist, I will say I was spoiled on this beforehand. I did know about this from when I was partway through the game, so it's not like I had a massive reveal, reaction to it, but I do think it's kind of cool, the fact that it seems like the kind of thing that it's not out of left field, because they did build up to it. It's not the sort of thing where they just bullshitted something in the final act. There are hints that we've seen on the way up to it, like with the cogs and whatnot, and it makes sense as we get more reveals going on too. But at the same time, tonally, it's not the sort of thing you would see coming. Given how quaint and restrained the tone of the game as a whole is, it's not the sort of thing you'd predict, I don't think. So that's what makes a twist work for me. And that's probably how a lot of people feel, I imagine. But it doesn't feel forced in. It feels like they definitely had intent of taking this approach, and it almost feels like the tone of the game. I'm not necessarily sure whether I would say it's a distraction, because it's incredibly fitting regardless, but it definitely helps in making the twist work. It helps you not piece it together explicitly. Even if you've got a bit of an idea that something's up, you still kind of there's not necessarily that immediate link that you might get with other stories that have a twist to them. Puzzle 94, Get the Ball Out 4. This one, we've seen these puzzles before, so I'm cracking up at how long this is going to take me before we even see it. But yeah, you know how the Get the Ball Out puzzles work. You just got to get the ball to the hole. It'll be fine. It'll be me reading through a guide and trying to do it as efficiently as I can and failing. But yeah, let's go back to the story, actually, because that's more interesting than me trying to talk through this. The twist, I feel like it's the sort of thing that I don't know if that would work for a game that didn't have this more laid-back tone. If this was a sci-fi game, or if this was maybe a more action-oriented game where there's a lot more explicit fantasy things going on, then I don't think it would work as well. But it's the combination of the fact that everything that we've seen so far in the game up until the reveal, it seems sort of grounded in its own little world. The whole everyone likes puzzles thing is a bit exaggerated, but in terms of the rules of the world that they've established, it very much works. Everything kind of seems on the level, but also the explanation for the twist feels like it makes sense in this world. There are some very human motives behind it, and that in itself, it makes it fit. It makes it actually possible to push the round peg into a square hole, or whatever the expression is. So throughout this final chapter climb, each time we solve a puzzle and get to a new room, we are going to get a little bit more information that leads us more toward the motive that I sort of teased, because it is very well done. I know I mentioned in an earlier part that this was one of the bits of contention some critics had, in that although there's puzzle gameplay, the actual story itself is very much spelled out to you. But Honestly, I feel like the way this is laid out, it's satisfying in its own way, because we're not just being given this, we are having to earn it by completing the in-game puzzles. And each time we get to a new floor, we're going to get a little bit more information explained to us. And that, to me, that works very well. It might not be what people explicitly wanted from a puzzle game of this nature, but for me, as someone who likes this as a narrative game, to have this last chapter where everything is kind of laid on the table, and as we're progressing, as we're completing the puzzles in the tower to get to that next level, we're getting that new bit of information. It still feels like you're earning it by progressing through the game. You're not necessarily having to like fill in like you haven't got puzzles related to the mystery itself, but it still feels earned. I know I've made this point in the most complex, unnecessarily drawn out way possible, but I like it. I very much like this final act. I will say that much. So, Puzzle 95, a magic square. Now, the magic square is a concept that I am familiar with. I had heard of this before, and I feel like I may have been challenged with some of these back when I was in primary school. The idea of magic square is that all of the lines, so that's horizontal, vertical, and diagonal, they all have to add up to the same number, and you need to arrange all the numbers into the right spot in this 3x3 grid. This one, naturally, given it's a maths puzzle, we're on the final part, you know how I feel about maths puzzles. I did look this up, at least what you need to add them all up to. The number they need to all add up to is 15. So as long as the sum of each line is 15, that's the magic puzzle as it's meant to be, as you see there. Yeah, magic squares have been around since ancient China. I like it when they give you them little bits of trivia, because I know not everyone will appreciate that sort of stuff the same way I do, but it gives you a little bit of depth to the puzzle side of the gameplay. Obviously, we're being exposed to the story side of the gameplay, the narrative side of the gameplay throughout this chapter, but when you get to the puzzles themselves, and when you bear in mind that this was originally meant to be an adaptation of a puzzle game, to have that extra context beyond just figure it out for yourself, I like that. I like that a lot. So this particular bit of information we're getting is how Don Paolo, it seems to have worked around what was going on with all of Bruno's precautions. And I will say, this particular element here, I don't think we needed it explained to us that it was Don Paolo who left his room as a pigsty at the inn. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory, if I'm being honest. This guy ended up here somehow. I love this guy. This guy, he was introduced quite late for a running joke kind of character. We first met him in the sewer, but I feel like the joke still pays off, the fact that we find him in this terrifying tower. And I would assume, given he's shown to be not from around here, that he's actually human. Obviously, I can't confirm that. I haven't taken him apart and seen if there's robot parts or if there's blood and guts, but, you know, he seems like a genuine lost tourist. Yeah, it would have been nice if we knew about the giant hole in the entrance, just saying. And here he is sort of doing the whole fucking Del Boy thing of just combining all the different languages that he knows into one, just to try and communicate, and that is fantastic. But puzzle 96 here. This is a puzzle where you've got to look at the information that's given to you, and cancel out what can and can't work until you figure out which one is Jim. And Jim is D. He looks a little bit hunched over on the bottom step there, like, I don't know, like, he doesn't really want to be there or doesn't really want to have his picture taken. I'm not entirely sure. Although, to be fair, that's quite relatable. He's changed the tune a bit there, now the spotlight's on him. And, like, he may not have any eyes, but he's definitely got a massive smile. Like, Jesus Christ, his tone changed entirely. I was going to say how I can kind of relate, not liking having my picture taken, not liking having to stand anywhere smart and looking presentable. That's really not my thing at all. But then the spotlight goes on him and it's like, yep, I'm the centre of attention. I love this. And like, granted, maybe there's a little bit of me that's like that. But, you know, I suppose everyone's in sort of two minds for that. They like attention when it's within their control, but not necessarily big on attention when it's forced on them. But I did just see there Luke speculating on whether he's human or not, like I was. But that's the point, actually. Out of all the villagers we know, I suspect that possibly Matthew might be human. Because Matthew seems to have been, like, the grounds tender for a very long time. Like, he was there working for the Baron when his former wife was still alive, so he'll still be human unless for some reason Bruno ended up making, like, a look-alike Matthew, which would have been a bit redundant. Although there is the whole thing of Matthew seemed to be unaware of the fact that Lady Dahlia's a robot. At least from what I recall of when he was talking about how bizarre it was that the new woman that the Baron brought home was the spitting image of his former wife. He didn't seem to understand why that was. So there's a good chance that Matthew there has just been looking after a village full of robots and having no idea at all, which is honestly a little bit sad if you think about it. But this is Puzzle 97, Maiden's Escape. And the Maiden is represented here with the large red block, so I guess the Maiden's maybe a bit on the thick side or a bit on the larger side, if that's what they're going for here, if it's not just basic symbolism. But this one is even harder to read from a guide than any of the, like, get the ball out type puzzles, because at least for them ones, there's enough different colour blocks that you can kind of follow it along if you just look at the guide, look back at the DS, look back at the guide. Whereas this one, because so many of the blocks are just 1x1 green blocks, trying to work out which of the 1x1 green blocks the guide's referring to at any given moment is easier said than done. I don't particularly want to think about how long this would take you if you were trying to do it without a guide, because this seems like your only option there would be trial and error. It doesn't seem like there's a method to it unless I'm missing something really obvious, which I might be. But there we go, we got the Maiden out of her cage or her prison cell or whatever it's meant to represent. Let's see here, I can't remember what it says on the explanation here, whether there is a method. Nope, it's just a classic example of a slide puzzle, so there's really not much that you can do aside from trial and error. I'm not sure if I did get the fewest possible moves. I think given I was following the guide, I probably did, but I know for a fact I wouldn't have been able to get that if I hadn't. And it just kind of makes me appreciate the people who write these guides so much more, because they would have had to have filtered it down and worked it out for themselves. Like, I don't think there was an official strategy guide published. But here is what's going on with Simon, in that when we saw Bruno taking away Raymond, the guy by the boat, he showed up a little while later and everything was fine. And what Luke and Layton are piecing together now is that every now and then the robots, they break down and they need to be taken away and repaired. And it would have just been coming up to Simon's time here, so that's why he seemed to have died. It was just one of his internal mechanisms that stopped working. But the fact that so many of the villagers were traumatized about Simon's death, that means that they themselves are oblivious to the fact that they're robots. And they function exactly like humans, so it would have only been Bruno who was aware of this in the entire village. Like, if Bruno's aware of it, then it's not as bad on his part as it is for Matthew, but I don't know, it's one of them philosophical questions, I guess, of whether a robot could be a stand-in friend or a standing family member, or whether you could have that same kind of meaningful relationship with a series of robots as you could with people in your life. Yes, Martha is in here too somehow, and the lost tourist, that makes sense in that he just has this ability to lose himself wherever. And also we've got the creepy lady who also has this ability to just show up wherever. It works out. Like, it'd be weird if like some of the other villagers showed up here after we saw they were terrified of them, but yeah. This is Puzzle 98 Card Order, another card puzzle from Martha here, and this one, similar to the one of the blokes on the steps, it is a look at the information given and try to piece it together like that kind of puzzle. It's similar sort of principle really, just seems like a little bit more complex given you've got to put multiple things in order rather than just work out what one of them is. But we are on the tail end of the game, so it does make sense that the puzzles would start getting quite a bit more difficult now. Now, they still have nothing on some of the optional puzzles that you can unlock from getting all the puzzle pieces and all that sort of stuff. Like, well, the painting scraps, which are basically a puzzle. That reminds me of the layout of one of the areas from Mario 64, the underwater ship area. Just because of the layout on the ramp up there. Similar to how the chests are laid out there. Yep, no puzzle is without an answer, and we're going to have to make our way into another area. You notice that all of the areas that we have to get into have a puzzle attached to them, because that's how it works. But this is like the final boss of maths puzzles here. I don't know if there is an easy way to work this out, other than, I guess, trying to piece together what numbers would result in 3, and then doing it for each figure, like the units figure, then the tens figure, and then the hundreds figure, and so on. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how you would do this. I don't know whether it's going to give us an explanation now or not, but yeah, that's a bit of a clusterfuck as far as number puzzles go. And yeah, there are actually 2 different configurations, as it says there. So there's 2 different ways that you can use them slots and arrange the numbers given to result in 33333, which I remember seeing that like as the name of the puzzle when I first played through this game, and I was like, what the fuck's going on here? And then I realised that, yeah, it's another maths puzzle. Goodie. Also, does this mean that Ingrid is human as well? If she was around back when Lady Viola was around? It must have, actually. I completely forgot about that. I completely forgot about the photograph. So yeah, if you hadn't pieced it together by now, the reason Lady Dahlia was made to look exactly like Viola was to kind of act as a stand-in mother for Flora. Yeah, that is one of the things that it feels like, to me at least, that it'd do more the harm than good in the long run, and it's quite difficult, I would imagine, to deal with that kind of grief at a young age anyway, but having a replacement seems like an unhealthy way to try and get the child to deal with grief. So I remember seeing a tweet going around a little while ago that was talking about a hologram that someone had designed that was for a mother to see a recreation of her child who had unfortunately passed away. And there was a bit of a debate going around of whether that's gonna be healthy for her in the long run. It's a very sensitive subject when it comes to grief, and I understand that, but I'm kind of seeing the parallels here of it's hard to let go if you're constantly seeing the image of the person you're trying to move on from. It feels like you're going to get trapped in the stages of grief, not being able to properly get out. Well, I'm not a psychologist, so I can't speak to this with authority, but it's just as a gut feeling, it doesn't really feel like the healthiest way of moving on. And for a young child like Flora, especially, because children don't properly understand death as it is, it takes a little while for it to sink in that that person's no longer with them. So to be seeing a mechanical recreation of them every day, it's going to make it take even longer to sink in. So this is Puzzle 100, 7 squares. It's quite a self-explanatory one, and it's honestly quite refreshing to have this after we had the really complex like Maiden Escape one and all the threes as a maths one. Just seeing, like, drawing some lines on a pegboard, it's a lot more manageable. It's not easy by any means, because you've got to figure out a way to get 7 squares without using any of the pins multiple times. But once you've got it done, you've got it done, and it's a bit of a mess in shape. It's one of them ones, again, that you do have to maybe think a little bit further than you usually would, because I can see how you might immediately go to just trying to make 7 squares of the same size rather than having them overlapping and having them different sizes. But at this point in the game, it has trained you to think outside the box. So yeah, I feel like you're probably well equipped for a puzzle like that. But that was the final story puzzle in Professor Layton and the Curious Village. Puzzle 100 was the final puzzle that you have to do in this game. So from here on out, it's all story. Or not necessarily story, it might also just be Layton and Luke complaining about having to go upstairs, which I can understand. It's like the 20 Flight Rock thing, but we don't actually know what's at the top. There we go, you completed every puzzle in the game. Smashing work. They don't have to give you any kind of notice like that, but I appreciate the fact they do. Like, especially if you're trying to do what I've done and show off every puzzle in the game, or just if you want to experience every puzzle in the game and not miss any, then to have that little pop-up saying, yeah, you've got everything. I appreciate that. It's something that I've noticed because I've been playing Super Mario World recently on my own time and recording that freshly playthroughs, and I wanted to get all 96 exits, but in the Super Nintendo version at least, there's not really an actual tip-off in the main game. You have to back out into the menu, which is kind of hard to do when you're emulating and you've got the movie files going. But back to the game itself, we have made it to the top of the tower, and it seems like there is something here of interest, a little cottage. So there we go, we have completed the final chapter in the game. It's all endgame from this point on, and I hope you guys are ready for a legitimately fantastic endgame here. That if you want to go back out and go back down to the village, if you've missed any puzzles or if you want to see what's going on, this is the point where you would want to back out and go back down. But given we got our little notice, I think we're good to go. We're good to try and wrap things up and see past the point of no return.
It's you! What's this? What's going on here?
My boy, what you see here is the golden apple herself.
So, we have found the golden apple, and yeah, the girl that we've been seeing around the village is Flora. Like, it is so obviously her. I actually very nearly spoiled it during a couple of parts of the commentary, actually, where it kind of escaped me that this was a thing that was a spoiler. It wasn't just spelt out for you because her disguise is so transparent. But yeah, this is where she's been living. She's been living up here at the top of the tower, which is probably quite lonely. But given her upbringing, I guess she's probably made peace with being a recluse, I guess.
What's going on? Hmm? Oh!
Oh!
Here I come! Ready or not! Follow me! Come now.
So yeah, the animation there is really good. Like, I love the detail on Don Paolo's mech. I love just the whole direction here. Again, it's a DS game, it's all compressed down, but it looks so good. Now, going on from here, I am going to say up front, we've got... If there's any contender for the crowning moment of awesome trope, This is Layton's right here.
Yes. Hmm?
Layton, I'll smash you right out of the sky! No! This isn't over yet, Layton! Just you wait! One day, I will have my revenge on you! Hold tight!
Hmm?
And there we definitely have the golden apple, and it all comes together. It's a fantastic ending sequence Curious Village has right here. I will say, we are on the tail end of the game now, so I feel like this is probably a good time to start wrapping up my thoughts on the whole thing. This is not the kind of game that I would have played back in the day, like when it first came out, and it's the sort of thing that I'm really glad I did give a chance to, because it's not just a puzzle game. Puzzles are a big element of it, absolutely. They're the main crux of the gameplay outside of the point and click overworld elements. But what I'm really here for is the narrative. The narrative here is absolutely fantastic. It's just everything about it. The twist that just works. I tried explaining earlier why it works, but I feel like the easiest way to describe it is that it just works. You've got the world that, over the course of the game, it's not really a long game, but we had enough time here to just completely fall in love with. You got the presentation, you got this very relaxed, peaceful European art style that complements the game's setting incredibly. You got really likable characters, you got fantastic soundtrack. I feel like the weaker parts of the game are the parts where some of the puzzles are ones that might be a bit much. The ones that I complained about that I needed a guide for because I wasn't going to find myself without trial and error, and maybe there's a bit too many of them. I'm curious if that got toned down in later games or not. I do intend to play more later games because I just enjoyed this so much. This part here, finding where the golden apple is obviously the birthmark. But yeah, this song I really enjoyed my time with Professor Layton and the Curious Village. It's just such a charming little game. But we've got one last mystery to solve here. And that is the true nature of the golden apple. What was hidden here that's been left here for Layton and Luke to find? Come on, Luke. Layton has worked everything out, and you must have clocked onto that by now. When you piece all this together, it's just such a sweet outcome that, you know, this old man, he loved his daughter so much right to the end that not only did he try to do everything in his power to make her upbringing go smoothly, even if it was a little bit misguided in parts, but he also wanted to make sure that she would have a wise and suitable mentor and guide who would find his way there eventually. Yeah, give Bruno some credit there. So yeah, ultimately the decision is still up to her, but the fact that her old man laid everything out so perfectly for her, like, that's a parent who loves their kid. And I feel like the test is honestly necessary for the amount of wealth that's left here, because if you let that much get into the wrong hands, then it's gonna be gone. So the fact that he has had this test in place to encourage people to seek out the golden apple is kind of necessary, but it does make you wonder in universe how many people would have tried and failed. Because the description of the golden apple was very vague, and that seems like it was intentional on the Baron's part, because you don't want to draw too much attention to something if you don't want to risk unreliable people giving it a try. I've given Layton a lot of credit for being the smart guy in this story, but the Baron knew exactly what he was doing too. Not quite sure whether having Bruno build poorly with anger issues was the most necessary decision he ever made, but I guess it's a little bit of variety. You can't know great people if you don't know some that are irrationally angry over puzzles. Life's a balance. You've got to take the good with the bad, take your strengths with your weaknesses. And that is another one of the sort of ethical questions that you could take with having these lifelike robots, in that although they are robots, they are very lifelike, and you've got to decide at this point whether it's okay to just make all the people stop when you take the gold. I did see in that portrait there that they showed Ingrid and Matthew among the robots, but I don't know whether that was just showing that as representative for the village as a whole, or whether it was just an oversight. I'm not entirely sure what they're trying to show with that, but it seems like Matthew and Ingrid are human, to me at least. curious as this village is. I love that. There we go, that's all 10 mysteries of Professor Layton and the Curious Village solved.
Goodbye then, little village. Cool. What an astonishing village that was, Professor. Does this mean you'll be gracing the front pages of the London papers again sometime soon?
No, Luke. St. Mystere's secret must stay between us.
Huh? Why do you say that?
You see, my dear boy, we don't want people to make a spectacle of Flora. That wouldn't be right.
Of course. Always thinking of others.
Well, one must always put a lady's needs first. That's what a gentleman does.
But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the Flameclaw, and this has been Professor Layton and the Curious Village. I'll see you next time for another playthrough.